The Verk throne room smelled like copper and burnt ozone when Marcus Day first walked through its doors, and his first instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 14 years of contract work across 6-star systems, was that something in this palace was already dying. He told himself he was wrong. He told himself it was just the atmospheric processors cycling stale air through stone corridors that hadn't been opened in years. He told himself a lot of things that first night, standing at parade rest with his rifle slung across his chest, and his eyes tracking the exits the way his old sergeant had drilled into him back when he was 19, and thought the galaxy was something you could navigate by maps. He had been hired through the Galactic Security Consortium, a formal title for an organization that was really just a clearinghouse for humans who had nowhere better to be. The Verk Dominion needed supplemental protection personnel for the transitional period following the death of King Verk XVI. The Queen, his widow, had requested the contracts herself. Her own honor guard had been depleted by the plague that had taken her husband, and the new candidates from the noble houses had not yet passed their ritual blood bonds. It was supposed to be temporary, 6 standard months, guard the palace, guard the queen, don't talk unless spoken to, don't eat the ceremonial offerings on the 3rd altar, don't make direct eye contact with the high consort unless she initiates it first. Marcus had read the orientation packet twice on the transit shuttle and had not retained much of it, because orientation packets for alien nobility contracts were always 70% cultural liability waivers and 30% actual useful information, and he'd learned to find the 30% by feel. He found it now by standing very still in the throne room and watching the 12 Verk honor guard soldiers who flanked the dais where Queen Sarel sat receiving the evening's petitions. He watched how they stood. He watched where their eyes went. He watched which ones checked the far door more than once. 4 of them, the same 4, northeast corner, checking the far door. He filed that away and said nothing. Queen Sarel was not what he had expected. He wasn't sure what he had expected. The briefing materials had described the Verk as a bipedal species with pronounced bioluminescent markings and a complex hierarchical social structure, which told him approximately nothing. What he had not expected was someone who looked tired. Not the tired of a long day, but the tired of someone carrying something that had been getting heavier for a very long time and had finally started to show. She was tall by human standards, and the bioluminescent tracery along her throat and collarbones pulsed slow and dim. The orientation packet had mentioned, in one of its 30% useful passages, that Verk bioluminescence reflected emotional state, with dim and slow indicating grief or suppression. She wore the mourning colors of the Dominion, a deep indigo that made the markings look like stars in a clouded sky, and she listened to each petitioner with the full attention of someone who had been taught that attention was a form of governance. She was good at it. That was the first thing Marcus actually respected about her. The second thing came 3 days later, when she walked past him in the corridor at midnight and said, without breaking stride, "You have been here 4 days, and you have not yet checked the maintenance sublevel for secondary access points. Either you trust my existing security architecture, or you are waiting to see if I notice." She kept walking. He stood there for a moment, recalibrating. Then he went and checked the maintenance sublevel. There were 3 secondary access points that the existing security architecture had left entirely unwatched. He reported this to Captain Velhareth, the commander of the Honor Guard, the following morning. Velhareth was Verk older, with the rigid posture of someone who had been doing this job for 30 years and had calcified into the shape of it. He listened to Marcus's report with the expression of someone who was deciding how offended to be. "The sublevel access points are covered by Dominion Protocol 7 Delta, Velhareth said. They are sealed and coded to the Queen's biometric signature alone. Protocol 7 Delta assumes the threat is external, Marcus said. It doesn't account for. I am aware of what it accounts for, Velharith said. You are here to supplement our personnel, not to redesign our architecture. I will take your observations under advisement. He did not take them under advisement. Marcus went back to the sublevel that night and installed 3 of his own trip sensors, the small passive ones that didn't require a power hookup and transmitted on a frequency his wrist unit could receive. He did this quietly in the dark, without telling anyone, and felt only mildly guilty about it. He had learned a long time ago that there was a kind of decision that happened before you could articulate why. A decision made in the part of the brain that was still running older, simpler code. The part that processed threat before the conscious mind had finished processing the data. He'd had that decision happen twice in his career, and both times it had been right, and he had decided a long time ago that when it happened he was going to trust it. It happened here, in this palace, in these corridors. Something was wrong. He just didn't know what yet. The answer began to assemble itself on day 11. He caught it the way you catch most things, not by looking directly at it, but by watching what surrounded it. The 4 honor guard soldiers who checked the northeast door. The way 2 of them always ate together, separate from the rest, in a corner of the barracks that made their conversation inaudible. The way the High Consort, Lord Vethkareth, had begun visiting the Queen's receiving room more frequently, staying past the point of protocol necessity, and each time he left, her bioluminescent markings were fractionally dimmer. He caught it fully on day 14, at 200, when one of his trip sensors in the maintenance sub-level registered a footfall. He was up before the alert had finished vibrating against his wrist. He dressed in 30 seconds, old habit, the ability to be combat-ready in 30 seconds, and moved into the maintenance corridor with his rifle safety off and his footsteps arranged in the pattern his first contract's instructor had called ghost walking. Weight transferred heel to ball with the knee slightly bent, maximizing surface contact and minimizing sound. There were 2 of them. Verk males, honor guard armor with the insignia obscured by black paint, and they were moving toward the Queen's sleeping chamber with the specific directional certainty of people who knew the route. Not scouting, not checking, moving. Marcus made his second irreversible decision in 14 seconds. He didn't call for backup, because the backup was them. He took the first one from behind with a forearm across the throat, applying the specific pressure that humans called a blood choke, and that he'd learned wasn't exclusive to human physiology. Most bipedal species with a central circulatory system had the same structural vulnerability if you found the right angle. The Verk soldier went down in 6 seconds. He caught the body before it could hit the floor. The second one turned and had just enough time to see Marcus before Marcus put him down with the rifle stock, grip first to the temple, calibrated, as much as these things could be calibrated, to stun rather than kill. He didn't know yet if they were acting alone. He needed them breathing. He zip-tied them both with the restraints he kept on his left leg pocket because old habits, carried them into a locked storage alcove, and then moved to the Queen's chamber. He knocked 3 times the way the orientation packet had specified as appropriate for urgent situation protocol. Nothing. He knocked again. "It is day," he said, using the truncated name that most Verk defaulted to because the full surname tripped something in their phonological processing. "Human security contractor. I have a situation to report that requires immediate direct communication." Another 5 seconds of silence, and then the door opened. She was in sleeping clothes, a simpler version of the court robes, and the bioluminescence along her throat was a slow pale gold that he had come to understand, over 14 days, meant something like cautious alertness. She looked at him with the full attention expression he'd first seen in the throne room, and he understood in that moment that it wasn't just a governance technique. It was how she processed, all the way, all the time. "Talk," she said. He talked, He told her about the trip sensors. He told her about the two soldiers. He told her what he'd seen over 14 days, the northeast door, the corner conversations, the way Lord Veth-Karath's visits correlated with her dimming. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and the bioluminescent markings along her throat cycled through something he didn't have a name for yet. "I know," she said. "You know." "I have known for 9 days. I did not know how far it extended. I did not know who in the guard I could trust." She looked at him with the kind of directness that bypassed all the social architecture of rank and species and got down to something more basic. "I have been trying to determine that. It has been difficult." "Why didn't you?" He stopped. He knew why she hadn't. Because every person she might ask was potentially compromised. Because the whole point of a coup that came from within the guard was that it trapped the protected in the center of the trap, with no direction to move that wasn't towards someone who might be part of it. "How many of your guard do you trust?" he asked. "With certainty 3, possibly 4. "And Velharith?" The bioluminescence along her throat dimmed. "He was my husband's man. I believe he is loyal to the idea of the Dominion, not to me specifically, but I believe he would not participate in assassination." She paused. "I believe." "That's thin." "Yes," she said. "It is." He spent the next 2 hours doing something he hadn't done in a long time, making a plan in real time, with incomplete information, under conditions where any mistake was terminal. He'd done this work in his 20s, close protection details in unstable sectors, 2 or 3 situations that had gone fully sideways and required improvisation at speed. He'd been good at it. He'd walked away from it because the walking away had eventually felt necessary for reasons he didn't fully understand, and he'd moved into the quieter contracts, palace work, ceremonial security, the kind of thing that was supposed to be exactly as uneventful as it sounded. He thought about that now, very briefly, in the specific way you think about ironic things while actively trying not to get killed. The Queen sat at the small desk in her chamber and they went over it together. She knew things he didn't, which household staff were bonded to which noble houses, the specific loyalties within the guard, the pressure points of Verk political structure that meant certain moves would trigger specific responses. He knew things she didn't: sight lines, structural vulnerabilities, the 3 secondary access points that Protocol 7 Delta had been leaving open for 2 weeks. They were, he thought, accidentally well matched for this. "The 2 you detained," she said, "when they are found missing from their posts. 2 hours, maybe 3, someone will notice. And if they have already communicated their failure, then we have less. But I took their communication units." He put them on the desk. "These are Verk standard encrypted. I can't read them, you can." She picked up the nearer one, and her fingers moved across it with the speed of someone who'd been using this technology since childhood. Her face didn't change, but her bioluminescence did, a rapid cycling through colors he was starting to read as an emotional vocabulary. This sequence, resolving finally into something slow and blue that he thought might be confirmation of a bad thing previously only suspected. "They communicated nothing after entering the sublevel," she said. "They were to signal on completion." She set the unit down. "Lord Veth-Karath will receive no signal. He will wait." "How long?" "He is a patient man," she thought. 3 hours before he sends another team, perhaps 4. "Then we move in 3. She looked at him. The bioluminescence was doing something again, and he was starting to believe it was something like reassessment. "You said we," she said. "I did." "You are a supplemental contractor. Your obligation under the consortium agreement is to report threats and coordinate with the senior guard commander, which is Velharith. Your obligation is not—" She stopped. "You reported to Velharith on day 4. He dismissed your findings." "He did." "And you are still here." "I am." She was quiet for a moment. The gold-pale glow along her throat came back, but brighter now, steadier. "What do you need?" she said. He needed 4 things: a layout of the palace's communication node, access to the 3 guard members she trusted, a distraction timed for 3:30 when even the most disciplined sentry rotation was at its biological low point, and about 20 minutes with the palace's internal alert system. He got all 4. The 3 trusted guard members were Sela, who was young and moved like a knife; old Varmeth, who had served the Queen's mother and whose loyalty was the bedrock kind; and a guard named Torhin who was, as far as Marcus could tell, loyal simply because he was constitutionally incapable of being otherwise. Marcus had noticed Torhin on day 2, the one who always stood exactly where he was supposed to stand, who never checked a door he wasn't responsible for, who held the line of his post with a kind of simple integrity that had nothing to do with politics. He briefed all 3 in the Queen's antechamber quickly, without embellishment. Sela asked 2 sharp operational questions. Varmeth asked none and simply began checking his weapon. Torhin listened with the full weight of his attention and then said, "Tell me where to stand," and Marcus told him. The distraction was the Queen's idea, and it was good. The Verk Palace had ceremonial bells that rang for religious observances, and at 3:30 she triggered a minor observance protocol that sent a 7-note sequence through the bell system, the kind that required 2 guards to attend the outer sanctum briefly. It moved 4 of the compromised guard to a position 80 meters from their posts. It was enough. Marcus moved through the northeast corridor with Sela at his left shoulder, and the first 2 exchanges were quick and clean and terrible in the way that these things were always terrible. Efficient, necessary, producing a specific kind of quiet that settled over a corridor like a change in air pressure. He had learned long ago not to feel these moments but to feel them after, to set them aside in a container he would open later when there was time for it. And he did that now with the practiced compartmentalization of 14 years of contract work. Varmeth took the communication node. Torhin held the Queen's corridor. Lord Vethkareth was in his private receiving room with 2 of the compromised guard, and the captain of the noble house soldiers, who had apparently been waiting in the palace substructure for 3 days, which told Marcus the plan had been further along than the Queen had known. The room had 3 exits. Marcus knew about all 3 because he had spent 2 weeks paying attention to things that weren't his job to know. He took the door on the right. It was a hard 4 minutes. He didn't remember all of it with perfect clarity afterward, which was normal, fine-grained memory in compressed combat, was a physiological quirk that the human brain handled by storing broad strokes and emotional weight rather than individual frames. What he remembered clearly was the moment the compromised guard captain raised his weapon at a range where the shot could not miss, and Marcus was out of position and knew it. And the thing that happened next was Sela, who had come through the left door while Marcus took the right, and who moved with the speed Marcus had clocked her for on day 2. The captain went down. Sela looked at Marcus across the room, and Marcus looked back at her. And for a moment they were simply 2 people who had just survived something, which was a universal experience that required no translation. Lord Vethkareth was against the far wall. He was older than Marcus had registered from a distance, with the bioluminescent markings of a senior noble, currently cycling through what Marcus was nearly certain was fear. Not the rapid cycling of shock, but the slow, comprehending kind. The kind that understood what had just ended. Marcus crossed the room and stopped 6 feet from him. "The Queen," Lord Vethkareth said, "cannot sustain the dominion. She is untested. The transition requires." "I'm going to stop you there," Marcus said. "Because I don't actually have a stake in your politics and I'm not here to argue it. I'm here because she's alive and you're not going to get another shot at this." He zip-tied Vethkareth's wrists with the last restraints from his left leg pocket. He had come in with 4. He was down to 0 now. He thought abstractly that he should probably carry more of those. The communication node was in Varmeth's control. The alert system broadcast the Queen's code, which in Verk protocol meant internal emergency resolved, which meant the loyal guard stations around the palace locked down and isolated rather than converging, which was the right call and had been the Queen's call, made in advance, because she had thought 3 moves ahead of every move Marcus had outlined. He walked back through the northeast corridor to the Queen's chamber. She was standing in the outer antechamber, not sitting, standing with the full attention posture of someone who had been waiting for a specific outcome and was holding the tension of not knowing it yet. When he walked in, her bioluminescence did something he hadn't seen before, a rapid movement from pale to gold to a bright, almost white luminescence that faded back to gold. He didn't know the name of it in Verk emotional vocabulary. He thought he knew what it was. Vethkareth is secured, he said. Sela and Varmeth are with him. Torhin is in the corridor. She let out a breath. The bioluminescence settled. And you, she said. Fine, he paused. Sela pulled me out of a bad position. So she gets credit. I will tell her. The Queen's voice was even, but there was something in it, a quality he had heard before in the voices of people who had just come through something that had required them to hold themselves together very tightly for a very long time. Sit down, she said. He sat because she was the Queen, and also because his legs had decided they were done pretending for a few minutes. She brought 2 cups of something from a small side table, not the ceremonial stuff from the third altar that the orientation packet had specifically warned him about, something simpler and hotter. And she sat across from him and they were quiet for a moment in the way that 2 people can be quiet when they have just been through something together, and the thing is over, and the account of what it cost hasn't been taken yet. I should tell you, she said, that your contract is with the consortium. What you did tonight, what you chose to do, was beyond the scope of it. I cannot compel your continued. I know, he said. You are not obligated. I know. She looked at him. The bioluminescence was doing the slow, steady gold again. Then why? He turned the cup in his hands. It was warm. The ceramic was rough glazed in a way that felt, for some reason, like something made by hand rather than processed. And he found himself appreciating that, in the specific disproportionate way, you appreciate small physical details when larger things have just been very sharp and very loud. I was hired to keep you safe, he said. That's the beginning and the end of it for me. All the political scaffolding around it, the contract language, the jurisdictional limits, the scope definitions, that's not what I signed for. I signed to keep you safe, so that's what I did. Even when your commander dismissed your concerns. Velhareth isn't my commander, Marcus said. He's the guy I was supposed to coordinate with. There's a difference. My commander is whoever hired me, and she hired me to protect her. He shrugged. So. The Queen was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the Verk sky was beginning to change, the deep indigo of night giving way to the first suggestion of whatever color dawn was on this world, and Marcus didn't know yet because he hadn't been here for a sunrise. He thought he might stay long enough to find out. You will have noticed, she said carefully, that my position is significantly more complex now than it was yesterday. Lord Vethkareth has allies who will require handling. The compromised guard members will require process. The noble houses will require reassurance, and some of them will require something more than reassurance. She paused. The 6-month consortium contract expires in 4 months. I noticed, he said. I am going to need to rebuild the honor guard from a position of uncertainty about which candidates I can trust. I am going to need supplemental personnel with a demonstrated ability to assess security architecture honestly, even when the assessment is inconvenient for those who outrank them. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. Also, she said, you have not yet had a sunrise briefing. I always conduct a security walkthrough at dawn. Captain Velhareth has been attending. I may need a different attendee temporarily while Velhareth's position is reassessed. Temporarily, he said. Initially, she said. He thought about the 6-star systems he'd worked through. The contracts that had ended in exactly the kind of quiet that they were supposed to end in, him walking away and the client continuing, and him never knowing what happened after. He had been, for a very long time, the kind of person who made a point of not knowing what happened after, because knowing required staying and staying required caring and caring had felt, for a very long time, like something he couldn't afford. He thought about the maintenance sublevel at 200, and the decision he'd made in the dark that he hadn't been able to articulate even to himself until it was already done. Tell me about the sunrise briefing, he said. She told him. It started at the eastern observation deck, which looked out over the Verk plains, and it involved a full perimeter review conducted on foot, which meant walking the exterior walls in the early light. There was a traditional Verk practice of marking the new day with a brief spoken accounting of what had been lost and what was still standing. It was a practice from before the noble houses, from when the Verk were still working out what it meant to build something together, and it had survived several dynasties because it was, the Queen said, a useful thing to be reminded of. What do you say, Marcus asked, in the accounting? Whatever is true, she said. The practice does not prescribe the words, only the honesty. He nodded. Outside, the sky was shifting. Whatever color dawn was on this world, it was beginning. I'll need to check the eastern wall sight lines before we go up, he said. The external cameras on that side have a gap in coverage between sectors 4 and 7. I noticed it on day 3. She looked at him with the full attention expression. In the growing light, her bioluminescent markings were a quiet, steady gold. Of course you did, she said. The palace was quiet around them. In the locked alcove in the maintenance corridor, 2 unconscious soldiers were due to wake up soon and find themselves secured. In a receiving room on the northwest side, Sela stood watch over Lord Vethkareth with the patient economy of someone who had already decided what she thought of him. Old Varmeth held the communication node. Torhin stood in the corridor because that was where he'd been told to stand, and Torhin, Marcus had understood from day 2, would be there when you needed him. Outside, the sky was changing color. Marcus didn't know the word for it yet in Verk, what they called this particular hour, this hinge between dark and light. He thought he would ask. He thought he was going to be here long enough to learn the answer, along with the name of whatever the rapid white-to-gold bioluminescence meant. And the name of the slow blue he was beginning to think was relief. And the names of all the things he'd been reading by feel for 2 weeks because he'd been paying attention in the specific, total way you pay attention when something in the older part of your brain has made a decision and is now waiting for the rest of you to catch up. He drank the rest of the cup. It was good. Not like anything from home, but warm and specific and good. He stood up. Let's go check the eastern wall, he said. She stood, and the gold along her throat burned steady and bright in the first light coming through the window, and they walked out of the chamber together, the human and the queen, toward whatever the Verk called morning. The gap between sectors 4 and 7 was exactly where Marcus had logged it on day 3. He showed her in the early light, the 2 of them standing on the exterior wall walk with the cold Verk dawn coming in across the plains below, and she listened without interrupting and asked 2 precise questions, and then was quiet for a moment in the way he'd come to read as her processing something deeply rather than dismissing it. When this was brought to me through the formal report channels, she said, meaning day 4, meaning Velhareth, meaning the dismissal, I was not made aware. No, he said. That is itself information, she said. It is. Below them, the plains were turning from gray to something he didn't have a word for yet, a color that wasn't quite gold and wasn't quite green, and the light was coming in low and horizontal the way early light does everywhere, at every dawn, in every gravity well with an atmosphere. And there was something about that The universality of it, the same physics, the same angle of light that Marcus found in this moment unexpectedly steadying. He had a tendency to find steadiness in unexpected places. He'd learned that about himself a long time ago. The cup with the rough glazed ceramic, the color of a sunrise, the simple integrity of a guard named Torhin who stood where he was told to stand. These were the things that kept you calibrated, that reminded you what you were doing this for, underneath all the threat assessments and contract language and sightline analysis. You were doing it for the people who made the cups by hand, for the queens who conducted dawn walkthrough, for all the small, honest things that required someone to stand between them and the things that wanted to end them. He had known this once, when he was 19. He had misplaced it somewhere in the intervening 14 years, in the accumulation of contracts and corridors and things he'd set aside to open later. He thought he was opening them now. The coverage gap can be closed with 2 additional units, he said. I have the specs. I can put in the request through the consortium equipment channel or directly through your household account, whichever is faster. Direct, she said, always direct. She paused. That is something I am learning to appreciate. He looked at her. In the dawn light, the bioluminescent markings along her throat and collarbones were not dim, not the morning grief slow pulse of the woman he'd first seen in the throne room 11 days ago. They were steady and measured and present, still carrying something. He didn't think that would go away quickly, or maybe ever, but carrying it differently. The accounting, he said, the morning practice. What are you saying today? She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the plains. I am saying that I have lost the illusion that loyalty is guaranteed by station, she said. I am saying that I still have the Dominion and 3 guard members I can trust and a security contractor who installed unauthorized sensors in my sublevel and did not tell me. She glanced at him. I am saying I have work to do. That's honest, he said. The practice requires it. She looked back at the plains. What would you say? He hadn't expected to be asked. He thought about it. I'd say I was wrong about this being a quiet contract, he said, and right about the maintenance sublevel. He paused. I'd say I came here to work 6 months and go somewhere else. I don't know if that's still the plan. Is it? He looked out at the plains, at the color that wasn't quite gold and wasn't quite green, at the light that was the same light that fell on every world he'd worked on, and every world he hadn't and would probably continue falling regardless of what any of them did. No, he said. She nodded. The bioluminescence along her throat did the bright-to-gold settling, the thing he'd seen when he'd walked back in after the night was over. He thought he knew what it was now. He thought the word for it in any language was something like good. They walked the rest of the eastern wall in the early light, checking coverage points, marking the gaps, making the list of what needed fixing and what was already solid. It was the same work it had been the day before: threat assessment, sight lines, the patient accumulation of detail that preceded all security planning, but it felt different now. Not easier exactly, more anchored, more purposeful, the way work feels when you understand what you're protecting and why it matters. At the end of the wall walk, where the exterior path curved back toward the palace's inner gates, they stopped. Below, the plain had finished its color transformation. It was fully day now, Verk morning, the sky a deep color he didn't have a name for and was going to ask about. What do you call this, he said, this time of day? She told him. The word in Verk was 4 syllables, with a glottal stop in the middle, and it translated approximately as the hour when accounts are settled. He thought that was about right. I'm going to need to brief the remaining honor guard, he said. The ones whose status is still undetermined. Walk through last night's events, establish new protocols, run a full review of the post assignments and the patrol rotation. Yes, she said. And someone needs to contact the consortium. The 2 soldiers I detained are still in the storage alcove. That's a situation that requires formal documentation. I will handle the formal documentation, she said. The consortium contact, can you manage that? Yes. Then we have work to do, she said, in exactly the tone she had used the night before, sitting across from him at the small table with the rough glazed cups, making a plan from incomplete information under conditions where a mistake was terminal. He thought he was going to hear her say that a lot. He thought he didn't mind. Yes, he said, we do. They went back inside, the human and the queen in the Verk morning, in the hour when accounts are settled, with a security coverage gap logged and a day's work ahead of them and enough standing still to begin. In the months that followed, people would ask Marcus Day, consortium administrators, security historians, a journalist who was writing something about human contractors in alien sovereign positions, how he had known, how he had seen it, how he had been certain enough to act before he had all the information in the dark, alone, when the smart play by every contractual and professional metric was to go up the chain and let someone else decide. He never had a good answer for it, not because he hadn't thought about it. He had thought about it quite a lot, over quite a lot of Verk dawns, on the eastern wall, in the growing vocabulary of bioluminescent meaning he was slowly assembling like a language. The closest he could get was this. He had been in enough places that were already dying to recognize the smell of it. Copper and burnt ozone. The atmospheric processors cycling something that should have been refreshed a long time ago. The feeling of walking into a room and knowing, before you can say how you know, that something in it is wrong. And he had learned, over 14 years and 6 star systems, that when something in the older part of your brain made a decision, the correct response was not to wait for the paperwork to catch up to it. You paid attention, you installed the sensors, you checked the sublevel, you stayed. When all the calculations and protocols and contractual obligations and chain of command structures had resolved into a single question, would you leave, or would you stay? He had known the answer before the question was finished. That was what humans did, he thought. Not the fighting, though they did that too. Not the stubbornness, though they were genuinely very stubborn. It was something quieter and more specific. The refusal to be in a situation and look away from what it actually was. The refusal to outsource the decision that was yours to make. The refusal to leave when leaving was the rational, contracted, professionally defensible thing to do. He stayed, that was the whole of it. He stayed because something in the older part of his brain had looked at a tired queen receiving petitions at evening, with her bioluminescence dim and slow and her guards checking the wrong door, and had made a decision that the rest of him spent 14 days catching up to. He stayed. And in the hour when accounts are settled, in the Verk morning light, that had been enough.